Lucy, what have you got to say for yourself?
Hello, friends. I'm your Vitamin girl. Are you tired, Rundown?
Never mind.
The ideal marriage between Lucy and Ricky on film was adored by Americans. However, Desi Arnaz was leading a double life behind the cameras that would stun the country. Through the underground network of Hollywood, he was seeing 2 or 3 ladies each week. At one gathering, Lucille Ball struck his supplier across the face. His darkest secret, however, was not the affairs. Everything was all but ruined by arrests, gambling debts, and threats from mobs. At the age of 68, Desi made a breakthrough in treatment in 1985 by saying 5 words that revolutionized his life. The reality was more repulsive than anyone had thought. Desi Arnaz was born in 1917 in Santiago de Cuba, and he was born with more than simply wealth. He was born with luxury, power, and legacy. His mother's side originated from the family that contributed to the establishment of the Bacardi Empire, and his father was already a mayor at the age of 23. Desi was raised in a mansion with more acres of ranch land than a youngster could possibly count, private boats, maids, and a house on its own island. The visitors to their estate weren't neighbors, and he played among prize-winning horses and fancy cars. They were commercial magnates, generals, and legislators. Desi's life was poised for greatness from the start, but Cuba had other ideas. Everything blew out in 1933 when he was only 16 years old. The estate owned by his family was overrun by armed revolutionaries and destroyed by fire. Everything was destroyed by them. They were pursuing the individuals after the house, the ranches, the animals, and the boats. They were targeted because his father was a politician connected to the presidency. Desi barely made it out alive. He was fleeing for his life when someone yanked him into a driving vehicle. "Viva la revolution!" he had to exclaim. When rebels arrived at their second property, his mother also narrowly avoided being shot while hanging to the side of the speeding car. Everything was stolen. It was all gone. His dad didn't get away. On political grounds, he was apprehended and imprisoned in Havana. Execution rumors circulated. Desi's mother waited for 6 months while her husband was imprisoned and subjected to dread and squalor. He was only saved by a last-minute legal action. Even nevertheless, Batista advised Desi's father to leave Cuba if he wanted to survive. Thus, the family gathered their remaining belongings and left the nation they had previously controlled. Desi was standing on a dock in Key West in June 1934, dressed in nothing except his own clothes. With a few $100, he and his father boarded a Greyhound bus to Miami. The palace life really ended there. They shared a warehouse that served as a storage office and was infested with roaches. They just had cots instead of beds. It used baseball bats to chase the rats away since they were so brazen. They consumed canned beans every day for sustenance. Desi, who had previously employed servants and drivers, was hired to clean bird cages at a pharmacy. His weekly income was $15. Even yet, he took pride in earning something at that time. In addition, he helped his father lay tile in opulent homes they could never afford and swept floors at Woolworth's. Desi, however, didn't grumble. Every cash he made and every rat he killed fueled a burning desire inside of him. He wasn't merely attempting to live. He was preparing a return. In order to pay for tuition at St. Patrick's Catholic School, he took on any odd job he could. He applied to St. Leo Prep, which is close to Tampa, when that wasn't enough, to get better in English, but music was what really made him fit in. His actual school consisted of American songs, movies, and hotel lounges. Desi could sing even when he could hardly speak English. There was no need to translate his appeal. Desi got his first big break in 1936 at the age of 19. He secured a position with the Siboney Septet at the Roni Plaza Hotel in Miami Beach, where he made $39 per week. The exiled president of the Cuban Senate, Alberto Barreras, endorsed him for the position, which came from an unexpected source. Rich travelers filled the opulent hotel, and Desi's music filled the air. His father, however, detested it. His son's desire to become a damned musician infuriated him, so he yelled at him. Desi, however, resisted. Anything was preferable to cleaning cages, he assured his father. He wore him down slowly. Then a cruel turn of events occurred in 1937. Desi received a job offer from Xavier Cugat, the most well-known figure in Latin music. Desi, however, quit his $50 per week ban to make just $25 with Cugat after accepting a 50% salary cut because he thought this step down could lead to something greater. And it did. His pay gradually increased to $35 after he made a sensation at the Great Lakes Exposition in Cleveland. He had a name now, yet it was still less than before. However, by 1938, the salary was insufficient. Desi was literally starving. When Cugat refused to bend on his demands for higher pay, Desi made a daring move. He struck a bargain. If he paid 25 vowels a week, he could form his own band and use Cugat's name, Desi Arnaz, and his Xavier Cugat Orchestra. Cugat concurred. Desi, however, had a disastrous debut performance. The crowd detested the music, nobody knew it, and two of his bandmates weren't even Latin. The proprietor of the club didn't hold back. "You've been let go." That was awful. That might have been it. Desi, however, fought his way back in 1939. He got a job at Manhattan's La Conga nightclub. This club wasn't your typical one. The theatrical district was right in the center of it. Desi made the location a sensation. He turned the conga line from a Cuban custom into a national phenomenon by introducing it to the American public. Every night, the club was full, and word of Desi Arnaz spread throughout New York. Broadway producers Rogers and Hart were drawn to his electrifying performances that same year. He was chosen for the Too Many Girls musical. The centerpiece of the show was his nightly conga routines. It was so successful that RKO's almost quickly purchased the film's rights. He was handpicked from a Broadway stage at the age of 22 to feature in the 1940 movie Too Many Girls. It was a significant shift, but it wasn't only the position that permanently altered his life. He met the woman on the set. Lucille Ball was 29 years old, shrewd, self-assured, and already famous. On the train to Hollywood, everyone was speculating about who she might fall in love with. Van Johnson received the majority of the wagers, but he shrugged and remarked, "Nope, she's going for the dark Latin type." He was correct. Desi and Lucille were lit by more than just romance. It was lightning. For almost a year, they concealed their connection from reporters, agents, and practically everyone else in their vicinity. However, their relationship was developing quickly and wildly behind the scenes. Desi was well known in New York nightlife before she even made it to Hollywood. Every night at La Conga was a frenzy due to his conga rhythms. Women were waiting in line to see him perform. In addition to playing, he was transforming Cuban music into a danceable standard in America. The war then broke out. Desi was drafted into the United States on April 27, 1943. Army, but he didn't serve in the typical way. The Army was unable to overlook his health issues. Physicians discovered damage to both knees and elevated blood pressure. In a football game, his left knee broke. On May 23, 1943, while playing baseball at Camp Arlington, his right knee began to ache once more. He was in excruciating discomfort. Additionally, although it was never verified, some medical professionals suspected Pellegrini Stieta sickness. Due to his injuries, he was unable to battle abroad and was assigned to a military hospital in California. 2 years, 7 months, and 4 days of service. There, he provided entertainment for injured soldiers and arranged celebrity visits that frequently included glasses of ice milk, the one thing that many recuperating soldiers most wanted, lifting spirits more than rifles. Medical records, however, were of little interest to Hollywood. Rumors spread quickly. While others were dying in Europe and the Pacific, gossip columns portrayed Desi as a coward for evading the draft. His career was all but ruined. He had to provide confidential information about his service, such as the fact that he assisted in planning visits to bolster the spirits of wounded veterans in order to defend himself. Even the milk thing required an explanation from him. Milk, indeed. It didn't set well to see him playing music and making jokes while others were fighting abroad. Despite having won the American Campaign Medal, the Army Good Conduct Medal, and the World War II Victory Medal. He formally changed his name from Desiderio Alberto Arnaz to Desi Arnaz on October 1, 1943, when he became a U.S. citizen in San Bernardino County. Even after he was honorably discharged on September 30, 1945, the rumors never completely stopped. Desi returned to work on December 1, 1945, the very next day. He quickly brought his orchestra back to life, and the timing couldn't be more ideal. There was a boom in Latin music. He secured a contract with RCA Victor and was hired as the bandleader for Bob Hope's Pepsodent show on NBC Radio. All of a sudden, Cuban Pete was playing loudly on stations all throughout the nation. Desi was bigger than ever, not simply back. He was accompanied as an arranger and pianist by his friend Marco Rizzo, assisting in the creation of a sound that combined the ideal amount of American flair with genuine Cuban energy. Desi's orchestra grew so successful that he continued to pay them even after he rose to fame on television. Even the music that would characterize them both would be arranged by Rizzo for the performance. But there was fire before there was fame. Desi and Lucille made the decision to get married after just 6 months of intense courtship that included arguments that could have rattled walls. November 30th, 1940 was the date. That day, Desi was scheduled to do 2 gigs at the Roxy in New York. Rather, he said, "I'm getting married," and called to cancel the first show. They believed that the wait time for a marriage license in Connecticut would be less than in New York, so they drove there. No, it wasn't. 5 days were still needed. They were married that same afternoon at the Byron River Beagle Club after a judge named Harold Knapp granted them a special waiver. Lucille had on a fur coat. The only store open on Saturdays was Woolworth's, where Desi purchased a ring. They returned directly to New York that evening so Desi could play the second show. He carried Lucille beyond the entrance of the dressing room. Although it was never simple, their love was genuine. Lucille once hurled a vase at him during a heated quarrel. From the beginning, their marriage was like fire and gasoline. Everything changed once again by 1950. Executives at CBS didn't think viewers would embrace a Cuban-American co-star in a sitcom. They questioned the entire concept, the chemistry, and the accent. Thus, Desi and Lucille traveled with their performance. Literally. They performed live events across the nation, demonstrating to crowded venues that their talent was not only genuine but also captivating. They were adored by the audience. Desi created something on television that year that no one had ever seen before: the technique of filming with 3 cameras. Aimed to capture all angles in a single take while maintaining the impromptu nature of a live performance. They taped the pilot on March 2, 1951, his 34th birthday. I Love Lucy was an immediate hit when it debuted on October 15, 1951. But Desi continued to innovate behind the scenes. Desi and Lucille sacrificed $1,000 of their joint weekly compensation, which had dropped from $5,000 to $4,000, in order to retain control of the show's negatives after CBS refused to pay more for high-quality 35mm filming. Everything changed with that choice. They owned the rights because they owned the movie. It may also be re-aired without sacrificing quality because it was $35 million. Reruns were a recent invention of Desi. He did more than simply alter a show. He completely altered television's business strategy. Almost all of the main primetime shows were filmed on 35 view per meter in Los Angeles within a decade. Desi was serious about artistic control. He dismissed the original director after just 1 episode. The pacing seemed off to him. He took over because the camera was acting awkwardly. He began directing, putting the actors through arduous, protracted rehearsals, scene after scene for 12 hours until the timing was ideal. Although it wasn't always enjoyable or simple, it was effective. The show became recognizable for its clear, quick-paced style. People laughed because the rhythm was perfect, not merely because the jokes were funny. Then the most significant moment of all occurred. For the first time in television history, an actual pregnancy was included into the plot when Lucille became pregnant with Daisy Jr. in 1952. Censors became alarmed. The word pregnant would not even be allowed to appear on television. Instead, the authors used the French term on sending or awaiting. However, something unprecedented occurred when Lucy went to the hospital in the episode that aired on January 1953, the day Lucille gave birth to Daisy Jr. via cesarean section, 73.9%. Of all American televisions were tuned in, implying that 44 million people witnessed Lucy's birth. More people watched Eisenhower's inauguration as president the next day. The baby was featured on the first cover of TV Guide and became known as Lucy's $50,000 baby. He accomplished something nobody anticipated in 1957. He purchased the old RKO photo collection. Howard Hughes famously ran it into the ground for $6 million. Desilu gained 33 sound stages from that acquisition, which was more than MGM or 20th Century Fox had at the time. He also didn't have any cash on hand to pay for it. Using the past to fund the future, he sold CBS the I Love Lucy episodes that were produced before to 1960. Desilu became an owner and ceased to be a tenant with that action. All of a sudden, it was more than just a production firm. It was an empire in Hollywood. In the same year, Arnaz made another audacious move. Despite opposition, he approved The Untouchables in 1959. It was brutal, dirty, and included actual mobsters like Lucky Luciano and Al Capone. The TV was not courteous. A few networks declined. Arnaz forced it onto ABC when CBS failed, and the risk paid off. It became a huge success, even while eliciting threats from actual criminals. In addition to earning millions of desi, though, the show demonstrated that adult crime dramas might be successful in prime time. However, there were risks associated with the success. Due to the show's depiction of the mafia, Chicago Mafia boss Sam Giancana allegedly planned an assassination on Arnaz in 1960. People in Hollywood were uneasy because the threat was genuine and severe enough. Giancana was under FBI observation, violent, and erratic. Only a last-minute veto from within the mafia itself put a halt to the idea. The strain of Arnaz's lifestyle, alcohol, women, and pressure ultimately caused his marriage to fail that same year. Declaring their life together a nightmare, Lucille Ball filed for divorce on March 3, 1960. Their issues weren't brand new. They had actually been constructing for years. When Lucille Ball was accused of being a communist by media back in 1953, she almost lost everything. She had registered in 1936 in order to appease her grandfather, who was a fervent advocate for workers' rights. At the time, it was a small matter, but now that McCarthyism was in full force, it blew up into a controversy. In big red letters, the headline read, "Lucille Ball a Red." While everyone was in a frenzy, Desi intervened. He dialed J directly from Edgar Hoover. She was publicly cleared by the FBI. In the absence of such, Desilu might have fallen before it even peaked. Arnaz was promoting a different kind of television experiment by 1957. He developed 13 one-hour specials, the Lucy Desi Comedy Hour, with a huge budget of $50,000 per episode in place of brief weekly sitcoms. With that type of money, the performance had the feel of a special event and was able to bring in well-known guest stars. The last ones were incorporated into Westinghouse's Desilu Playhouse, while the first 5 were broadcast as seasonal specials. They are able to avoid the monotony of weekly production while maintaining viewer interest with these one-hour episodes. Through 1967, CBS continued to broadcast those programs as summer replacements. Additionally, Desilu was no longer solely about Lucy and Desi. The studio produced 26 performances by 1959. Arnaz had transformed DeSilo into a creative haven. Bold new ideas were tested at the Westinghouse DeSilo Playhouse. Among them was The Time Element by Rod Serling, a bizarre tale of a guy who has a dream about Pearl Harbor. The Twilight Zone, which debuted later in 1959, was a direct result of that one show. Star Trek and Mission were ultimately the result of that same creative freedom. Not possible. During Desilu's heyday, both were greenlit, but there was turmoil simmering behind the studio walls. Arnaz was consuming more alcohol. Their daughter Lucy Arnaz later claimed that the entire family was impacted by the booze. His drinking was becoming evident on camera and wasn't just a personal habit. Lucille Ball felt enraged. She felt that the audience was unaware of the turmoil occurring at home, and she watched his performances deteriorating. It was more than just drinking by 1959. Arrests were made. Desi was seen staggering intoxicated on Hollywood Boulevard one evening. Lucille was mortified by the headlines, and their daughter recalled the incessant shouting at home. Then came the ladies, and not just the sporadic liaisons. Hollywood insider Scotty Bowers claims that Arnaz was seeing 2 or 3 women per week, all of whom were set up for him by a powerful underground network. Bowers even said Lucille Ball hit him across the face after confronting him at a party. Betrayal forced her to transcend the boundaries of her charm. Infidelity wasn't the end of the issues. Arnaz had a severe gambling problem as well. He once lost so much money in Las Vegas that, after paying off obligations, Desi only had about $70,000 to $80,000 left over when he went public in 1958. In comparison to the studio's value, that was hardly a dent. Furthermore, the losses went beyond money. They damaged his family, his image, and his relationship with Ball. Despite the divorce, Arnaz's issues persisted. In 1966, after being remarried to Edith Mack Hirsch, he opened fire on some adolescents who were allegedly tormenting his daughter Lucy. He was taken into custody and accused of using a lethal weapon in an assault. A backyard altercation had landed the man who had previously stood beside America's most adored comedian in county jail. His choices never seemed to be far from pressure, anger, and alcohol. Nevertheless, there were indications in the quieter times that he recognized who he had become. His children persuaded him to get therapy years later, following the death of his second wife in 1985. "I'm Desi and I'm an alcoholic," Desi declared as she stood up during an Audi meeting. It was truthful. It was real even if it was broken. Desi Arnaz retained ownership of Desilu Productions for 5 more years after Lucille Ball paid $3 million to buy out her shares in 1962. Then, in 1967, she sold it for a staggering $17 million to Paramount's parent company, Gulf Plus Western. That's more than $160 million adjusted for today's value. Both monetarily and emotionally, the transaction signaled a sea change. Arnaz brought the mothers-in-law to life for NBC's and started his own production company almost immediately. In addition to producing the sitcom, he also directed each episode, gave it his all, and even placed Lucille Ball in a number of unexpected roles. He made his own cameos as Senor Delgado, a colorful matador part that nodded to his theatrical background, as if that wasn't enough of a full-circle moment. After leaving the studio he and Lucille had created from the ground up, it was his first significant endeavor. In 1976, over 10 years later, Desi stunned everyone by making a comeback to the public eye with his kid on Saturday Night Live. Desi Jr. was the musical guest actor. He published his autobiography, simply titled a book, that same year. The pages, however, were far from straightforward. He talked candidly about losing everything when he fled Cuba during the Revolution and having to start over in Miami. Before he ever appeared on TV, he cleaned bird cages in pharmacies. He wrote on the sudden breakdown of his once privileged existence and how he battled valiantly to change who he was. For the first time, audiences were able to see past the slick-talking Ricky Ricardo and into the life of a refugee who achieved the American dream through bluffing, but things weren't always so great. After experiencing a significant flare-up of stomach pain in December 1981, he was taken to Scripps Memorial Hospital in La Jolla, California. He was 64. The diagnosis was a well-known problem, diverticulitis. Between 1969 and 1970, he had already undergone 4 significant surgery for it. He was admitted to critical care this time due to the illness, and his health fluctuated between serious and fair. Despite everything, Lucille Ball remained in his orbit and openly disclosed that this was not the first time he had experienced the sickness. His health problems were attributed by doctors to a lifetime of drinking and smoking Cuban cigars. Physical, where indicators could no longer be ignored. More damage had been done to his body than most fans could ever comprehend. The year that changed everything then arrived. 1985. Desi reached his lowest point with the passing of Edith Mack Hirsch, his second wife. His children persuaded their father that it was time to confront the reality, particularly Desi Jr., who had previously undergone his own rehabilitation process in 1981. Arnaz, then known as Bill Sanchez, entered a treatment facility at the age of 68. Just silent surrender, no spotlight, no press. And he stood up at a meeting and declared, I'm Desi, and I'm an alcoholic, in what Lucie Arnaz would later describe as her proudest recollection. It was straightforward and unvarnished. He didn't drink again after that. For precisely 1 year, he was able to maintain his sobriety, but the harm had already been done. His body was too weak from years of drinking and smoking to appreciate the tranquility that sobriety eventually offered. Desi started working on reviving his former production company in 1986. Lung cancer took away his ambition, vision, and drive, but he still had them. The diagnosis struck hard and quickly. His physician didn't mince words. Smoking those Cuban cigars was the cause. That's the reality. He attempted to conduct business from his bed as his condition deteriorated, dictating directions and waiting. Lucie was by his side all the while. After overcoming addiction and reaching the other side, cancer took everything away from him just as he was beginning to get clarity. Desi Arnaz passed away in the arms of his daughter in December 1786, exactly 1 year after he became sober. 2 days prior to his death, he was 69 years old. She called him on what would have been his 46th wedding anniversary with Lucille Ball. She repeatedly said, "I love you," even though he hadn't eaten or spoken to her in 3 days. Finally, he replied, "I love you too, honey," in his final complete words. "I hope your show goes well." She attended his burial 5 days later in silence. She then went to the Kennedy Center Honors to accept her own Lifetime Achievement Award, scarcely able to breathe. However, Desi's legacy continued after his passing. People started to realize years later how groundbreaking his business choices had been. Desi and Lucille paid $5,000 each episode to hold the rights to I Love Lucy after CBS declined to cover the additional expense of filming the show on 35 Millitrum. The rerun industry was born out of that one action. That show alone was still bringing in $20 million annually for CBS in 2012. Alongside Carl Freund, the mastermind behind Dracula and Metropolis, Desi had also invented the 3-camera sitcom format. He insisted on filming with the polish of a Hollywood production in front of live audiences. Desi Liu was a juggernaut worth $17 million, or around $130 million in today's currency, when Lucille sold it in 1967. Desi had $20 million in net worth at the time of his death, primarily from royalties associated with the very company he helped create. However, neither the money nor the innovation were the most affected. Years later, it was the realization. In a stirring 2025 interview, Lucie Arnaz said that her father's celebrity was not her happiest memory. He got up and called his name during that silent time in treatment. Although, "We don't air our dirty laundry in front of other people," she remembered him telling her. However, everything changed when he did. Even if it was a few years too late, he put healing over pride. However, the legacy has one more twist. Arnaz had taken a chance in the last years of Desi Liu before it was sold. He supported a pilot for Star Trek, a little-known science fiction program. It was costly, disorganized, and almost destroyed the studio. This also applied to Mission Impossible. However, what at the time appeared to be a failure ended up being one of the largest payouts in TV history. Over $10 billion has been made by Star Trek alone. Mission Impossible generated an additional $3 billion, but they were little more than money pits in those days. Too costly to keep the business afloat. Desi Liu was forced to fold after CBS refused to pay for Star Trek's budget overruns. 2 of the most prosperous franchises in entertainment history would eventually emerge from the very shows that broke the studio.